Tell us about the hitchhiker you picked up.
Oh, but, okay. Outside of Eugene, Oregon, I picked up the hitchhiker yesterday. Anyway, a day or two ago. And he had a swollen elbow, so I gave him Reiki while I was driving, and it worked. The Reiki worked. I love Reiki.
Tell us about your amulet, your crystal.
Oh, I found this. There's a place called Stick, Stone, and Bone that these wonderful dykes own on Christopher Street, New York. And then,
I didn't really like dykes to own anything on Christopher Street.
yeah, that's the only, yeah. And they just don't make necklaces big enough for me. So a friend of mine made this little like copper jockstrap thing for it. And actually, I had a dream that I went to Mount Shasta, so I stayed there last night and put it in the snow. So that's all I have to say about it.
Anybody have any questions? More?
Let's do that.
Somebody has to.
Not to generate more awkwardness.
Well, I have many questions because this is my first time in this city and first time at this place. And
Ask David then, because
yes. So, what is? Do you need to get inspired, or inspiration is just coming from inside? Is it something that comes from outside of your realm, or? Yeah, I'm European, so maybe the question is stupid.
Well, I think maybe excitement might help. I mean, inspired is kind of a funny word. It's poetic, which I don't know, I actually am kind of liking lately. But I think excitement is more to the point, and that can come from anything. It can come from punctuation, Like my favorite, what's her name, Ann Carson. I'm like her Sappho translation is like dynamite. But the best part of it is the introduction. It's all about translation, which I'm very interested in. And in it, she says brackets are exciting. And I'm like, wow, because it just means that nothing, that incredible sense of closure, but enclosing what's gone, So it seemed very kind of romantic and formal at once. So inspiration can come from any place, and excitement is even better.
And one more about poet's world. How would you define it?
I think it's all about it. David, what do you think?
It's fraud.
Fraud or fraud?
Fraud. It's fraud. One thing that may be differentiated from many other art forms is that because I find it hard to imagine that any poet could imagine that they could ever make a living or get any sort of, in this country, any sort of feedback on their work or any sort of purchase in the larger culture other than from each other. So I think it leads to a certain kind of mutual support network, which is similar to DIY scenes and punk scenes and things. It's also interesting given that it's somewhat of a dead form, like opera, right? Which is contingent on. Well, I won't say it's a dead form.
Well, look at this room. I mean, I just think it is and it isn't. I think it's weird that everybody has something to say about poetry in a weird way. Like, nobody is neutral on poetry. They're like, oh, or I love it, or I will dedicate my life to this. I mean, it's a very funny little place, and I think that's sort of what's exciting about it.
Well, I guess I've dedicated my life to it.
You have, you fool. You have too, and we actually make a little.
Well, I never said it was dead.
Who doesn't make a living? I mean, we make a shitty living, but we kind of make it.
I stand corrected. That's right.
Jocelyn had a question.
Yeah, I want to know about what happens where it meets the book. Like, what's that excitement?
Oh, that's when it well, God, It's like, well, it was sort of, it literally, it was when it moved. Because I was writing a book that was affected by the space of California, and it felt radically different, and it was changing my poetry practice. Like there's that New York joke about, like, don't go to New York, or don't go to California, it ruins your writing. You know, and I found this whole, it may have been true in the 60s, they were talking about, it may have been true in the 60s and 70s, I don't know. Or that was the fear in the 60s and 70s. But I felt this other thing happened, and it was really exciting. But then I moved back to New York, and I was like, oh my God, I've got to learn how to write poems in New York again. But the good news was that I fell in love. And so then, of course, I knew how to write poems, you know. So it's like, these two books were not necessarily friends, they were something. And that's why I decided to flip it and just say, you know, like, you know, they're having a good time with each other.
Conrad, with the somatic exercises, I have several questions, but I'm wondering, do you do when you have the instructions, do you do them over and over again? And then when you make the book, did you decide which one out of each kind of exercise? Or do you just one of each, like generate one from each set of instructions? And that's the book?
Well, they're all different. I mean, there's the first ones I wrote a single color food for a day and then wore the color. But I was doing, it's all research that I'm doing at the same time about what I can do. You guys researching Ernst Chladni, who's from the 19th century, and he discovered the shape of sound. Do you all know about that experiment where you put sand on a metal plate and ran a violin bow on the edge, and then it jumped into the shape of like a guitar or a violin body? So, but of course everybody keeps saying, oh, Ernst Chladni discovered this. I was like, well, no, these instruments have been around for centuries. He didn't discover anything. But, so then it was like, well, how do we always know that? So then for the blue poem, I listened to Blue Velvet on a continuous loop all day, and it was like really, really oppressive. I didn't do enough research. And I found out then that, you know, that when you listen to language, it's decoding on one part of your brain, but if it's just sounds, it's a completely different part of your brain, and it's not oppressive. Why I went into that, I don't know, I guess because I don't know how to answer your question, but I'm going to keep going for just a second and say that I do them all the time. I'm doing one right now, as a matter of fact.
But I mean, do you pick
Like right this moment.
Like, well, I guess what I mean is like, so if you if you embodied, surrounded yourself with blue that day, do you do it another day per day?
No.
Oh,
No, in fact, yeah. Yeah, there's this.
They're kind of one-off.
There are these people that wanted to film me doing one, and I said, I don't want to redo them. I'm not interested in redoing things. So I'm doing another one where because I went to learn Reiki, really for animals. I want to do Reiki. I don't care about people as much. But I learned these techniques and sending back trauma to your past. So I'm going to do that in a meat counter in a grocery store where I'm going to be giving Reiki to hamburger and all that. So, you know, and you never know what you're going to write. So, I don't know what to say. It's infinite what we can do. Poetry is as alive as it could ever be, really. You know. Sorry, David.
So how did you feel standing there? What was going on inside of you doing all those minutes, not using language and having to put the language in somebody else's body?
It was incredibly difficult. I knew how many minutes it took, but that's not an experience. Experience of duration is not merely about I'm going to stand still for 8 to 10 minutes. But I've worked with Abby before, and we do some work between movement and language, and you know, using instructions and prompts. But there's something about resisting doing it in the way that the body wants to follow instruction, wants to be told what to do and respond to that, and to resist that. But then also to be very conscious of being, whether anyone was watching, being in front of an audience to do that. It became a public refusal that, it was a very intense experience.
Did you take that footage?
No, that's various footage that's been on, live streams.
Can I say one very amazing thing that just happened a few weeks ago? Well, first the police came for me because I went into the Philadelphia Magazine office to complain about something, but that's a whole other story. But I bring it up because it took the police 4 minutes to get there to arrest me. A week later, Occupy Philadelphia went to Wells Fargo Bank, the flagship location in Philadelphia. And the bank manager locked them in and called the police, and the police refused to come. And the police in Philadelphia are really torn about this whole Occupy thing, but they really hate the banks. They really hate how they're losing their jobs. And yeah, they just absolutely never came. The bank manager was screaming on the phone. 20 minutes later, after waiting, they were just like, "We'll get there when we get there," and they never came. So, I was like, that's good. You know, there are some good things. You know.
In September, I was almost arrested. I was with a group of people, and we were doing this thing called it's sort of where this T-shirt comes from. It was a bunch of Buddhists who were doing like a homeless retreat in New York for 4 days, like we planned to live on the street. But coincidentally, we planned to do it at the same time that Occupy had just started to be there. So we went downtown, and we had like a leader, and he's like, pick up cardboard, and we're carrying cardboard. And then he claimed to know a good alley, like in the Wall Street area where we could all sleep. So we're all like walking along with our cardboard, looking for our alley, and suddenly we realized a cop car is following us. So we're going around the block, like big city blocks, and they're following us, driving it was so weird. We were just like walking like cartoon characters, like they're there. And finally we come to Occupy, and as soon as we get on the sidewalk, it's a comedy, the cops go, "Okay, and if you walk away from your people again, we're going to arrest you." So we were like forced to sleep with Occupy. We would have gotten arrested, which I thought was so strange. Bad night's sleep, too.
This is beautiful. It's the brink of spring, you know, so.
I was thinking about when you were up there and the traditions of endurance performance, and have you considered the fact that any of us would want to go up and actually replace you or take the burden off you or any of those sorts of, because I thought of that because I've been of course, in my world, I've gone to many events where that is part of, you're watching somebody do something very arduous and it goes on for hours, and somehow maybe you, in the complicity of it, you join or take the burden off them and replace them or something. Is that something that's being considered as you?
Early thinking about this, Abby had suggested doing this. I did a variation of this in New York, asking people to. I was reading the text, but asking people to come on stage or stand up and close their eyes and put themselves in that spot. But I haven't tried it yet. But I don't want. 10 minutes wasn't that arduous. It would, I don't want to think that. But I think it would be. To pose that question. I've done pieces before like that where I'm interested in suggesting a possible, situation for an audience member without necessarily directly inviting it. But it's hard to do that without being manipulative. But it's posed as a question, right? Because because it's about the inability to represent bodies that are put in positions that it's very difficult for us to imagine to offer our bodies in their stead, right? Especially when things can't be broken down into sentences describing the movement of the body, but it's about what kind of solidarity can be enacted with different kinds of bodies, and who stands in those places in those moments. But that's I'm not suggesting this piece answers that, but those are some of the questions that I was thinking about gesturing towards.
It's impossible for you to not talk about how your friend died, that violent act, without imagining it in my body. Every time, I think the torture of hearing that story is that there's like this compassionate knee-jerk response in which I imagine dying that way, and think of it as just the worst kind of entrapment and sense of, and even imagining, maybe there's a relief at some point, you think this is going to happen, and it's going to happen fast, but that's part of the terror and the effect of it is to go through it.
Well, I was also trying to be able to be part of something that happened, but not being like a confessional poet writing about it. I didn't want to write about it. I wanted to do something for it, but I didn't want to be writing a poem about what happened.
Makes me think of, what's Brianna's last name?
Skelly.
Skelly. So she's a primarily dancer, I guess, right? She's a local dancer, Brianna Steele, and she did this piece, which was an improvisatory text piece where she described various ways she's died and talks about the day. And it's this fascinating. So what would be like? It was my 84th birthday, and my grandkids were there. It was a beautiful sunny day. Like describes all the elements, and they're stunning. They're sad, but they're beautiful. And then like one, she gets beaten, or one from breast cancer, or one, all these different ages. But because she's improvising it, you see her imagining it, and then you're put in that situation too. And those were great. She's fantastic. It was really great.
Do you mind if I just tell you that there's a piece in the new book where I was mugged at knife point, and I did this ritual every morning where I would predict my death.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Bludgeoning or electrocution. But I'm not, is there a film of that?
Yeah, there's a film of it.
That's something.
I think we have time for one more official question and then filling about questions afterwards.
CA Conrad, I was wondering if you've received poems in response to the exercises and whether you have or not, what kind of responses you want.
David Brazil just wrote this. I'm just so honored. He did an exercise that's not in the book where I take a Mina Loy quote and Carla. I love Mina Loy. She's just a genius. And Portal, where you cut a hole in it, and he wrote an exercise from that.
I did the stone one. It made me swallow that first.
David has done more than one, and so has Juliana Spar, and then there's dancers who've been doing this thing where they remove the words right and they put in dance. So,
Parting thoughts?
yeah, thank you for being.